Welcome to another episode. I'm your host, Emma Auriemma-McKay, architect and interior designer known as the Dream Home Manifester and the Realtor's Architectural Advisor. I created this podcast to bring you topics to help your business. And today we're going to talk about a particular kind of investment that normally isn't featured. But first, I want to tell you something that I've been doing, and it's about your new listings. So when you get one, congratulations. But the thing is, you've got to get your clients to get that home in shape for the marketing photos and for the open houses. And usually you have to tell them to totally declutter and lose half of the belongings. And usually, no matter how nicely you can say it, they could get offended. So preserve your great relationship with your client and let me be the bad guy to have them tell them what to do. You can use my service, Stage to Sell, with what they have. The intent is to use what they have to make that home shine in the photos and the open houses. For information, go to stressfreeremodeling.com and hit the tab that says real estate. The information will be on that page. Or just give me a call, 775-527-7590. Okay, so let's get talking about this investment opportunity. Many of you work with investors or are investors yourself. And today I want to bring awareness to another kind of investment opportunity we don't normally hear about very much, and that is self-storage properties. Our guest, Scott Krone, is the expert in this type of investment, and he'll share the benefits with us. Scott is a Chicago native whose career in architecture began in 1991 by pursuing his Master's of Architecture from the Illinois Institute of Technology. While obtaining his degree, he also worked as a project manager for Optima, a design-driven real estate development firm. In 1998, Scott founded Coda, an award-winning design, build, sustainability consulting firm. Since its inception, Coda has won numerous design build awards. In addition, he's authored High Performance Homes, Navigating the Green Road to Your Dream Home, a book for homeowners seeking to incorporate green technology into their home. In 2012, Scott founded Coda Management Group, a firm who specializes in managing real estate assets. Currently, the platform of investments is in excess of $70 million, consisting of self-storage assets. And most recently, in 2020, he co-founded One Stop Shelf Storage with facilities across the Midwest. Well, welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much. Also, a little plug back for you. If your clients need to declutter, they can certainly, we have plenty of self-storage for them.
There you go. That's a good alignment we have. I didn't think of that, but that's perfect. Yes, yes. So I love the fact that you studied architecture and you have that background. So with your work, and I know the company that you worked for before did beautiful buildings, and I'm one for keeping the environment beautiful. So thank you for doing your work.
Pleasure.
Yeah. So it's interesting that the sequence of investments and your background of different kinds of things that you ended up with as self-storage units. How did that come about to being in this space?
Well, I think a lot has to do with, the path that we get on, and then, what forces in the marketplace impact it. And
Yeah.
so, when I was getting my master's degree, I was working on large residential developments. One was 400 units, $100 million project. And so then, I was working there on that. Plus, when I was working for him in his company, we were also doing other multifamily. We were doing conversions. So when we started, I started in the residential realm. We were first single families, and then we got into mixed use and multifamilies. And then the crash came, and everybody had to reposition, because a lot of those markets were just instantly gone because there was no financing. And that's when we began really researching the self-storage industry. And what I saw was that it's very similar in terms of understanding the concepts of it. But if you think about it, we're all dealing with a box. It's just the complexity, the level of sophistication within that box. So, a home, they can be very extraordinary. We've worked on $14 million homes all the way down to $100,000 homes.
Right.
But if we look at that, and then you take multifamily, which is just a smaller version of a box,
Right.
and then if you take it even further down, you're looking at self-storage. And so it's all on the chain of the line of the continuum of rental units. And so it's just a much more simplistic model.
Mhm.
We have a lot more flexibility with it, and it's a
Yeah.
lot more predictable. So for me, it was a business decision to do it. I mean, obviously, it wasn't a design decision. It's not as elegant to design self storage as it is a multifamily. But from a business point of view, it's a lot less risk. It's a lot more flexibility and a lot more predictability.
Wow. Well, that certainly makes sense. So why is it such a great investment compared to, say, residential?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now is that we're entering this recession. I would argue that we're in it. Others would say we're just on the front end of it.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a lot of volatility in the marketplace because, when the Fed says that something is overpriced, the housing bubble, the internet bubble, usually that's going to be a good indicator that there's going to be big movement. I saw it before. I've seen it time and time again. Now, I began in real estate in 1990s, early 90s, and so since that period of time, I've been through four major recessions. But what we've seen is that when the recession hits, those industries tend to pull back, right? Because
Right.
interest rates are higher. It impacts what people can afford. It impacts whether or not people want to do it. But what we saw was that self-storage during a recessionary market, actually occupancy levels increases, because
Wow.
inherently what it's doing is it's responding to people's pain. You began the show by saying, hey, someone's moving, but we have to declutter. We have this pain that we need to be able to move stuff out in
Right.
order to sell our house for the best value. Well, that's a painful thing. Like, what do I get rid of? What do I keep? I don't want to get rid of
Mhm.
this. Where do I put it? And so it's a relief valve. And so when people are going through divorce or dislocation or displacement or death, it's a way of people addressing it. And then what we saw in the pandemic is the way in which people's homes are being used has dramatically changed. They're now classrooms, they're now businesses, they're now gyms. And so people need extra space, and it's easier to offload some of that than perhaps moving.
Right, right. Well, I don't know, with all those activities now going on in the home, they may need all their stuff. So I don't know, that could be an adverse effect for you. We haven't seen that yet, but that's kind of an interesting way to look at it too. But I love what you were talking about, that pain point. And there is events that happens, like someone dies or you have to quickly move, and you have to find a place to store all your things. So that's a great way to do that. And I guess people don't think about it until that kind of event happens in their lives. But this is kind of a good thing to get it out in the open, to get people thinking about that as kind of a backup for all their things. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other side of it is 50% of our tenants are businesses. So
Oh,
businesses are
interesting.
using it for supply chain.
Oh,
With the pain that we have, like I can't get something, so I'm going to order 1,000 of them because I know I'm going to need them, and then I'll have them, but they don't have the ability to have a warehouse. And so
yeah.
it's a benefit for both businesses and residences.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but that's true. Probably entrepreneurs who are manufacturing kind of things, if they're mailing or shipping things, they need extra storage space other than their home. So that's another way that you can help them. That's good. Good. So when you're looking for these properties, what's the kind of criteria for finding the best property for a self-storage? How do you evaluate that?
Well, what we've been doing is we've been buying underperforming commercial buildings and converting them into self-storage. And
Uh,
so our typical model is something between, call it 80 and 100,000 square feet. We look at the zoning, we look at how it's built. We look at, the ceiling, floor to ceiling height to make sure that we have the clearance between the locker heights, the sprinklers, the HVAC, all those sorts of things. And then what we also do is we look at the zoning. Zoning is a big factor of it. We have rezoned properties, but we prefer not. And so, we take in all those considerations and see how it plays out. But then the most important thing we look at is we look at the demographics, because it is a very predictable business model. So we see how much supply is already in the market. And if there's too much supply, then we won't go in for that property. We will look at a different property for it. And so, if we say Chicago, Milwaukee, cities that we're in, there's areas that are very saturated, and then there's areas that are not. And so we bought buildings in those areas that are not saturated.
Well, it's an interesting way to evaluate that. And I would think that being close to housing, all kinds of developments, you'd be a great resource for them to do that. And it's part of that emotional aspect too. What we were talking about, feeling that pain. It's, when anyone has that kind of event, it's emotional thing, and we need to fill that gap for them. So that's great to have that space available for them. And
Yeah,
what,
a lot of the facilities that we've done recently in the cities, there are a lot of residential people moving into it. So, especially prior to the pandemic, people were
right,
downsizing and moving to more of an urban lifestyle. And
yeah,
so they were downsizing from their home, and so they needed something to, a place for the Christmas tree, or for
yes,
the summer toys, or the winter toys, those sorts of
right,
things. So
right,
that is a change in how people are using their homes as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, and using the underused buildings, I think now with after the pandemic, with so many people working at home, and there's so many office buildings almost empty. I know a while ago I saw a big article, I think it was in the New York Times, about a business park in New Jersey that had tons of buildings, and they were basically empty, and they were brainstorming how to use them. And so that kind of thing, what you're talking about, to have storage housing if the zoning permits, but to have all that available in those areas, and to use those kind of buildings that are left basically vacant now, and to really put them to good use. So that's a great way to kind of recycle our buildings, that most of them aren't even that very old.
I would say that is three of the buildings that we have done recently. Milwaukee, Toledo, and Dayton. They were all former buildings which were used to store things, with files from banks or attorneys or law firms, and
Yeah,
everything's gone digital. So the need for these
right.
massive buildings for storage of data files is not there, because everything's now in a computer, right? And
Yeah,
so we can divide the building up, and then rent it out in smaller increments to people that can use it.
perfect, perfect, great. So when you're doing these buildings, it might be obvious, but just walk through the difference when you're creating a self-storage space as to residential. I would think there's a lot of cost savings, things you don't have to do. I guess this is why it makes it a great investment.
Yeah, I mean, what we say is it's apartments without toilets, right? And so, I don't have to put in nearly the plumbing and all those sorts of things. But the biggest factor, I would say, the difference is, when we were doing residential, we were trying to get around 90% efficiency. And when I say that, we would be selling or renting 90% of the floor plate. So 10% would be dedicated towards circulation, hallways, entrances, elevators, stairways, vertical chases, those sorts of things. With self-storage, because our units are much smaller, 5 by 5, 10 by 10, 10 by 15, we have more hallways. And so by definition, we have more circulation space. And so for us, it's how to maximize the layouts, and then, but also looking at what the market is requiring, because that will impact our income. So if we build too many, if the community is very affluent, then they're going to want bigger units. So
Mm,
if we design a bunch of smaller ones, we're going to get lower income, and it will impact the valuation of the building. So we look at the valuation of what the market wants, and then we design around that so that we're maximizing that,
okay.
and then trying to minimize our circulation space. But in our current buildings, where we have drive-in, you can literally drive into our buildings,
Oh, yeah.
into a living area, close the garage door behind you, and then unload in a dry, safe, and secure environment. That takes up a lot of circulation space. And so
Yeah.
those are the biggest differences. And then we do have sales offices. None of the multifamily that we ever designed had sales offices on site.
Mm.
And so those are the things that add up. So if we're generally speaking, if we can be around 70% efficient, then we're pretty good.
Oh, interesting. So is that what might make you different than other self-storage companies? Is that the design, the keen eye of design of making the property efficient?
Well, I think we do four things. So one, we're the developer, so we're structuring the deal. Two, we're designing it. Three, we're building it, and then four, we're managing it on the backside. And so there's not too many that actually do it from A to Z.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes us different, is that we focus on the entire process of developing a property into self-storage and then making sure the valuation is there on the backside.
Yeah, I love that, the combination. I think it's always more efficient that you don't get different companies dealing with things. And so it's all in-house and everyone understands how that works, and the communication and the whole way of using the building and having it function is all very sync. So that really makes sense. I think that's great. I love the whole process of the design, build, and management. It just makes it so efficient. And I would think that is where your cost effectiveness can come in too. So that's good.
Absolutely. I mean, what we look for is, when we go in the marketplace, we're getting the best pricing from our vendors as possible in each marketplace. So if sometimes our vendors go with us from Chicago and then, work in different cities, they'll do that. But we also are going and tapping into the local resources. And so we're always, we're not carrying our own crews. We're,
Right.
subcontracting it out to make sure that we get the best pricing for our investors.
Oh, that's good. Now, all this adds value to the project, but I remember I heard you talking on another podcast where you took a building where it was underperforming and you turned it around to make it more profitable. How do you do that? What is your strategies for that?
Well, in that case, what we saw was it was a very affluent community. And what we saw was that, like, on a day, we would rent like 10 self-storage units at one time. And then they would be there for 9 months, a year, and then they would move out. And what they were going for were these really large 10 by 20 units. And the 10 by 10s were not selling. And so we were digging into it, and we're like, well, what's happening? And what we discovered was that people were remodeling their homes. And so they didn't want to rent 16 10 by 10s. They only wanted to rent like 8 10 by 20s. So they would come in, move all their stuff in. So these things would be every cubic inch of these lockers would be filled with stuff.
Yeah.
Because they'd move out the entire contents of their home into self-storage, remodel their home, and then move it back out. And so what we saw was that if we removed the wall of the 10 by 10 and made it a 10 by 20, we leased up 10 by 20s immediately. We converted them. So basically we dropped our unit count, but we increased our occupancy because we were able to rent the same amount of square footage to people, but yet in their minds, it was better for them to rent a 10 by 20 versus a 10 by 10, even though it had 2 doors.
Yes. Well, that's great to really understand the market and respond to it. And like you say, with your buildings, you have flexibility, and not a whole lot of buildings can do that so easily. Which brings to mind, when you change wall locations like that, do you have to go for a permit to say you're changing the wall location?
No, that's the beauty of it. Like, I couldn't do these things in multifamily, right? You can't take a 1 bedroom, combine it with a 2 bedroom, make it a 3 bedroom.
Yeah.
But because of the way we build, all of the lighting, egress, fire safety, all of that is done overhead. And so that way there's no changes to any of those things. So all we're doing is we're unscrewing a light gauge metal wall and then moving it to the end and screwing it into the side panel. That's all we're doing. And so it literally takes like 20 minutes to change the configuration, and then we can rent it out.
That's brilliant. That's great. That's good. So with these investments, what kind of returns can an investor expect if they invest in this?
Well, when we look at 2 different things, so we're buying existing assets, and then we're either looking to improve them or expand, and then we're developing. And in both those cases, there's 2 different levels of risk tolerance. There's 2 different time frames. If we're buying an existing one, then the time frame is typically shorter because we don't have to do the development, the lease up, all those sorts of things. And so, we model it around in the teens if we're doing a rate of return for our investors. And if we're doing, anytime we've ever done new construction, it's always been, our goal is to be in the 20s. And so that's because of the level of risk. We expect that there's higher level risk, longer time frame. And so that's why we always model it out over, in the 20s.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. So I'm glad for people to hear this so they can think about investing in this or advise their clients to think about looking into this space as well. So it sounds
Well,
like
there's really three different strategies for this. Like
Mhm.
we classified as three different asset classes. There's class C, B, and A. And unlike multifamily, we think of class C, it's like not in a good neighborhood. But that's not the case with self-storage. For class C,
Yeah.
we view that as like a penny stock. So it's class is a first generation facility, typically smaller, maybe your mom and pop, and it's like clipping a coupon. It's just a good, consistent little check. And you might have some appreciation in it. A class B is more suburban, over 200, 300, maybe 300 to 400 units,
Wow.
and it might be climate controlled. And we view that as a blue chip stock. And then the class A is the urban ones that are much bigger, 600 to 1,000 units, and they're fully climate controlled and drive in and state of the art. And we view that as a growth stock. And so
Wow.
whenever we're talking with someone, we first determine like, what is your strategy? What is the best, what are you trying to get out of this sort of investment? And then identifying which type of facility is best for them, because
Mm.
it's not a one, our company's name is Self Storage, but investment and goals are different. And so sure that what they want, we can align with.
Well, that sounds great. And especially that the fact, as you mentioned earlier, that they perform well in recessions, that sounds like a pretty secure investment. And it's kind of a thing that almost like passive, they just sit down and you do all the work. So do you have, when they come to you, you form kind of an investment group? Is that how that works with you?
Each property is in its own LLC, and so they have
Okay.
individual investors for each property.
Oh, good, good. So are,
So,
go ahead.
well, I was going to say there are other companies that do like a blind pool, and so
Okay.
they created a real estate trust, and then they're at their discretion they're buying different assets, but that's not the way we've set up ours.
Oh, so it's by project that you would invest.
Exactly.
Oh, okay, good, good. So with your company, is it growing now, or are you reaching out into other parts of the country?
Well, we began the Chicago market, and our first expansion outside of Illinois was to Wisconsin and to Milwaukee, and then we've done we're working on two facilities in Michigan, and then we have Toledo, Dayton, Louisville. We're in Virginia, and we're also in Maine. So we're expanding.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I know here locally, I belong to a couple of real estate investment groups, and people are always talking about investing outside the state here. And I'm in Reno, Nevada. So I can't wait for them to hear this episode so they can consider working with you and growing their wealth. So that'd be great.
Well, it's funny because when we were first, doing the project in Milwaukee, we had investors from the San Francisco Bay Area, and we were telling them that we were buying this building, 100,000 square foot building for $1.9 million. And they're like, that's like a 1-bedroom condo here in San Francisco.
I know the prices do range, don't they, from a place in the country to another, and even locally. That's when I'm talking to people about remodeling or something, we have charts we can refer to, but, even I'm sure you know this too, when you buy a property, say in the suburb in the same area in the inner city, the prices are going to vary too. But yeah, that's great to compare from one place in the country to another. So,
Right. And that's the reason why they were investing outside of that area, because the
yeah.
prices were so high.
Exactly, exactly. Well, this has been great information, Scott. I'm so happy you joined us today to make us aware of this whole nother opportunity people don't really think about. So thank you so much for that. And you were offering a resource for people. You want to tell us about that?
Absolutely. First, thanks for having me on this show. I really appreciate it. It's been fun. If your guests reference the show, then what we'd like to do is send them two different things. One is a feasibility report. Why we hire consultants to verify what our assumptions are, so that when we go to the banks, we can say, hey, look, this is not just our opinion, but we're have third-party verification of this.
Mm.
And so it's like a 100-page report about the self-storage market, not only nationally, but why we chose to develop in that property, that specific location. Because our buying radius for our clients, or for our clients, when we refer to our clients, that's our customers that come and rent self-storage, is 3 miles. And so we're specifically looking at a very specific piece of property. And so we will give them the feasibility report, but then also we will give them a self-storage deal analyzer so they can compare a multifamily investment or a single family investment to self-storage.
Oh, that'd be terrific. That's really interesting. Thank you for that gift. So everyone, get your gift, have a look at that, and consider a different kind of opportunity. And Scott's contact will be in, well, I'm sure in his report that he sends to you and in the show notes. So look him up. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.